Now, you can make your career sound as, oh, it was all planned out when I was 15 and this is the path I went on. We know that's all going to be generally hogwash. The impact that you knew about or you could see for the patients, the quality of life, and that permeating not just for that patient, but for their family member, their social lives. I still get goosebumps now, just even talking to you about it. It's such a hard and lonely journey for the founders and for those small companies. I'm just blown away by their resilience.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode I talk to amazing research adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research adjacent space is where the real magic happens. Hello and welcome to the Research Adjacent podcast. I'm your host Sarah McCluskey and today we'll be meeting Louise Jopling. Louise is currently the Chief Scientific and Innovation Officer at the Babraham Research Campus, a biotech business park in Cambridge. She is also Entrepreneur in Residence at the academic Babraham Institute, which is on the same site. Louise originally aspired to be a vet but became an immunologist instead. She started out on an academic research path but ultimately moved into the commercial side of the biotech industry, a career move which included launching the psoriasis drug Stellaria and commercialising other healthcare innovations. Now she supports both fledgling and established businesses as well as helping academic researchers explore the potential applications of their work. In our conversation we talk about why the Babraham Research Campus is such a special place, her career story, and why making a difference to real people is what gets her out of bed in the morning. Listen on to hear Lou's story. Welcome, Lou, along to the Research Adjacent podcast. It's fantastic to have you here. I wonder if we could begin by just hearing a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Great, thanks Sarah, and lovely to meet you. So yes, Louise Jopling, my day job is as Chief Scientific and Innovation Officer at the Babraham Research Campus in Cambridge. I'm also a Royal Society Entrepreneur in Residence at the Babraham Institute. My day job as CSIO is very much around working with the 60 life sciences companies that we have on campus, and they are anything from a 2-person startup through to 100, 150 person grow on, scale up company that have grown whilst being on campus, perhaps over the past decade or more. And it's understanding what their needs are, helping especially the small companies come out of stealth mode, develop their data package so that they become ready to put in front of investors, making those connections between researchers, clinical teams as well, and investors in particular, because of the financial markets that we're in, particularly in life sciences.
So yeah, at the Babraham Research Campus then, it's a site, so near Cambridge, yes?
That's right, yeah, about 6 miles south of Cambridge. So yeah, we're in the southern cluster. If you know where Addenbrooke's Hospital is, and if you know where the Wellcome Genome Campus is, then we're right slap bang in the middle. Okay. You're driving past us, so pop in and say hi.
Yeah, and so it's all focused on life sciences then, all the research that goes on that site. Could you give us maybe a couple of examples of the sorts of things that people are doing there?
Oh yeah, so we've got companies that are supporting other companies in their development, their drug discovery and their drug development capabilities. So often small companies don't have those skill sets in-house, maybe haven't got quite the industry training in generating those robust data packages. So not quite acting as a CRO, or contract research organisation, but actually working in true partnership to enable them to develop that data package for toxicology, for their formulation of their drug or their molecule. So that's a sort of very high level example for one of the companies. And then we've got some very early stage startup companies, very much around antibody and biologics engineering.
Yeah.
So as a campus, monoclonal antibodies are our sweet spot. these days, quite a lot of those protein modalities are very much around the antibody drug conjugates. It's a lot about AI or machine learning helping inform the best target to go after, or targets, and the best combinations, let's say, of whether it's two drugs in combination or whether it's a particular conjugate once that molecule has got it onto or inside the cell. And the research focus of the Institute is very much around, if we say healthy aging, that sort of makes us tend to think about the later stages of the life course, but actually the research focuses across all life stages for human health, from birth to death. And it's really about, we all know we're living longer, but we're not healthier for longer.
Yeah.
We all still have an average of about the last 20 years is in poor health. And that's where the healthcare utilisation really is needed. So it's aiming for that lifespan to be extended.
Oh, fantastic. And I imagine having all of those companies and that intense research all happening in the same place is fantastic for support and collaboration and those sorts of things. And it sounds like that's very much part of your role.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got the academic researchers and the companies on campus, companies off campus as well, theoretically even within the perimeter of our campus. And we are on 430 acres, I should say. We don't use that by any stretch. And again, you could imagine just even getting between buildings. But just to have that close proximity, and we've got a central sort of building where people from all across the campus come for their lunch, their coffees, their meetings. So it creates, I call it the melting pot, because that's really where those serendipitous interactions could and should be happening. And part of what I want to bring as well is how can we really maximise that? So you need a critical mass, you need to be coming to where everybody is, but can we enable that at other parts of the campus as well, and in other ways? But I think through the funding that we get through the BBSRC, which is the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council, that really does, it pump primes those academic industry partnerships. And there's also a collaborative PhD studentship programme on campus that has supported or is supporting 22 PhD students, all at different stages of their journey, where they have to spend at least 3 months in their industrial company organisation. Now, whether that's 3 months as a single time period or whether it's a week here, a week there, but they get that industry supervisor as well. So really great
Really fantastic. Yes, to connect up that research with that real world potential impact. Yeah, which is such a big aim now for research. So how does all of this dovetail with the entrepreneur in residence role that you have as well?
Yeah, I'd say it dovetails seamlessly, but obviously I would see that. So the entrepreneur in residence role, so that is specifically for the academic institute, and it is to support the translation and commercialisation of the research conducted within the institute. Now, it's a small institute, about 350 staff, so, mostly scientists, from PhD student up through to group leaders, but there's also some heads of core facilities. So these are real capability centres of excellence, if you like, that are funded by BBSRC, particularly to serve the academic research, but where bandwidth exists within those core facilities. And what I mean by those core facilities, it might be a flow cytometry, it might be sequencing, it might be an animal unit as well, because often some analysis needs to be conducted in vivo. So they're just some examples. But where there's bandwidth within those facilities, then the companies themselves that are on campus can actually pay to use those services and to enable their discoveries. And one very small company, they're in stealth currently, so I can't say their name, but did describe being on campus as having your own CRO, contract research organisation, on your doorstep. The CEO and founder was particularly, he was walking over to our central stores facility. Doesn't sound very exciting, but actually it's this massive procurement hub off the scale that enables the science for the companies and for the institute to happen seamlessly. The small company is not having to negotiate with 500 different suppliers for basic things like gloves through to highly complex stuff. They can just move onto campus, crack on with their science, and everything else is taken care of. But going back to the institute itself, obviously it conducts many more enabling services in addition to the research. But yeah, the world leading research, high impact papers from the group leaders, the PhD students and everybody in between, and all enabled by that infrastructure and the capabilities. So yeah, as I say, it's a small institute relative to quite large universities, etc. But that's meant I've been really able to get under the bonnet of all of the science that's going on here and all of those commercialisation projects. And I think one of my biggest issues or things that I wrestled with at the start of the fellowship was, how can I make an impact one day a week, parachuting into the institute? And it was really getting under the bonnet of all of the programs that were in the commercialisation portfolio, let's call it, and working out these are the ones that are perhaps more mature, or that really I could bring an impact. And so there's about 4 or 5 that I'm really actively working on. It doesn't mean I'm ignoring the others, but they're not all equal at the same moment.
Yeah, and also, as you say, one day a week, you can only do a limited amount of stuff, so you have to prioritise to a certain extent. Yeah.
I think it's like when you start any new job, you think of what's your 30, 60, 90-day plan, or the first 100 days going to look like. And I very quickly realised, actually, my first 30 days is really only going to be 4 days. So that was a real awakening. Not a bad thing, but it just means that, yeah, you do focus and prioritise. But I think the other piece, that it's not just about the science and translating, that is a core piece, but it is also about, and this is the nature of this podcast, research adjacent, and it is about helping hone and inspire sort of the scientists from wherever they are in their career journey, in their own research and their own aspirations. And yeah, I got to present a Science 360 talk, which was very much talk us through your career. Now, you can make your career sound as, oh, it was all planned out when I was 15 and this is the path I went on. We know that's all going to be generally hogwash for a majority of us. And just talking that through and actually bringing that to life. And it wasn't just attended by the more junior people at the earlier stages of their career. There were some really quite senior individuals in that audience asking particular questions pertinent to where they were at that moment in time, whether that was from a professional but also from a personal perspective. And a lot of it is, how does one manage one's time? I think if anybody had got that nailed, we'd have patented it and be making money
somebody would be making a lot of money out of it.
But I think sometimes one can project things as if, yeah, it's all sorted and it's all a doddle, and that's how it can look to others. But actually really getting under the skin of either what drives me or where you might have had to make personal sacrifices or compromises.
Yeah,
it just shows that authenticity and the fact that you're human.
Yeah, and I think that's leading us really nicely then to just invite you to tell us a bit about your career journey, about how you've ended up where you are now, what kind of jobs you've done along the way, what's your path been?
Yeah, so overall, I'm a scientist by training. I always wanted to be a vet. So from when I was about 11, when unfortunately my cat needed to be put down, he was my cat, and I felt if I was the vet, I'd have saved him. Of course, what an arrogant 11-year-old. Of course, you're going to think that. Yeah. However, followed that and focused purely on science throughout GCSEs, A-levels and university. I didn't get into veterinary at the time, but I'd got my other courses that I'd applied for, animal biology, so zoology. But I wanted to specialise in parasitology, so worms, parasites, which led me to study up in Scotland, actually. And it was based on where the course was. I was always fascinated by how parasites evade the host immune system. Yeah. Again, that then led me on to my immunology research path. So I'm no longer a parasitologist. I still remember all of those things. But as an immunologist, I got a very great grounding in my first two roles after I graduated. And I should just say, after I graduated from the University of Aberdeen, I did an 8-week summer studentship actually at the Babraham Institute. Oh. And I didn't realise quite how circular this was all going to be. Yeah. So again, I could make that be a perfect story, but it's not meant that way. Anyway, so I did a couple of research assistant posts to get experience in the labs, one of which at the University of Edinburgh at the Centre for HIV Research. And at that time, so that was the mid-90s, when chemokine receptors, these G protein coupled receptors, had been identified as co-receptors for viral entry into cells. They were facilitating the HIV virus getting into cells and then amplifying. And that was a really sweet time, in as much as it really captured my scientific interest. And we were on the start of that crest of the wave around that particular area of research. And so really, I followed that family of receptors throughout probably the next decade plus of my career. And that was in both academia, but also in biotech. So I did my 2 research assistant posts, got experience in the lab, competent, and I then applied to what was Europe's leading chemokine receptor lab. And just the letter I wrote, I read it back some years ago and it was quite cringe, but my timing was fantastic. It was all, the chemokine receptors were wonderful, this, that and the other, my research. And but I really wanted to do a PhD. Fortunately, that lab at the time, based at Imperial College, had attracted some industry funding. So in essence, I was industry funded. It was a US biotech company. And so for 3 years, I conducted my PhD research. I think what was great was I was able to conduct that research within 3 years. So from registration to submission.
That is impressive.
Yeah, no, thank you. But I think it was because I'd already earned my stripes and got all my lab skills in the 2 years prior in those research assistant posts. So again, that really enabled that. Anyway, I then followed the receptor I'd been working on in my PhD out to Boston to Harvard Med School. So I was working at Children's Hospital and that was fantastic. So then in end of 2002, I came back to the UK. I always thought I was going to stay in academia, to be quite honest, but never say never. And I came back to a job in biotech. Yeah. And at the time, it was Britain's biggest biotech company called Celtech. And Celtech had a small molecule site in Cambridge on Granta Park. So literally a stone's throw from where I'm sat talking to you today. And I was recruited there as a pharmacologist, and I was there for 6 years in small molecule drug discovery, leading a team of pharmacologists as well. And then 2008 came and in that 6-year period, Celtech were acquired by a Belgian medium-sized pharma company called UCB. So that for me at that time was quite junior in an industry career. You felt that the rug had been taken from under you. We've been acquired. What are they going to do? They're headquartered in Belgium. Are they going to shut us down? That's your first very human, visceral thought. No, they didn't. And keep doing what you're doing. Otherwise, you play to that narrative, that sort of negative human thinking. And so, I think that was about 2005 that deal all went through. But then in 2008, they did announce the closure of that Cambridge, the Granta Park site. They kept the Slough site, and that's still going today. And I was one of the few lucky ones at the time that was offered retention within UCB, but it meant relocation to Slough. And I thought, I'll see what else is out there. It was a fantastic plan B, and a plan B that many of my colleagues didn't have. So I was acutely aware of that. But then through friends, people in your network fighting your corner going, I think this job could be good for you. I joined Janssen, which that was the name at the time, the pharmaceutical arm of Johnson & Johnson. They've now rebranded to Johnson & Johnson Innovative Medicine, but then they were Janssen. But I moved away from the bench. So I stopped being a bench scientist conducting the experiments. I moved to launch a product. Yeah, so I was the product and therapy area expert for a drug called Stelara, which I still feel that I'm Stelara to the core. The molecule, the mechanism, but not just that. So that's the scientist in me talking, but I was getting closer to the dermatologists prescribing that drug.
So what's it a drug for?
So it was launched as the first indication in psoriasis.
Right, okay, yeah.
And it was a different mechanism of action, totally new mechanism of action to the other biologic therapies that had been on the market for psoriasis. It's now got indications across a number of different diseases, psoriatic arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, for example. But that was the impact that you knew about, or you could see it for the patients, the quality of life, and that permeating not just for that patient and what it meant for them, but for their family member, their social lives. And just those are I still get goosebumps now, just even talking to you about it. I had the pleasure to attend a psoriasis clinic in Manchester at what was Salford Royal at the time. And just hearing those individual patient stories, their journeys with this chronic debilitating disease, they'll stay with me forever. But it was just awe-inspiring. But I think one of the other pieces that role taught me, so I was covering the whole of the UK, so I was engaging with dermatology departments. I got to see all parts of the UK. Some I might not necessarily want to go back to, but how it just opened your horizons.
Yeah.
But you got to really hear the challenges of the healthcare system, the prescribers at the time, the nurses, and whatever those challenges were, but helping them understand the appropriate place for use of that particular drug in amongst all of the others. How do I make those treatment decisions? And that drug wasn't necessarily, you wouldn't give it to every patient that came through your clinic door next. It was just, but it now is an option, whereas we didn't have that option so many months prior. But one of the biggest learnings I had was training a sales force. They didn't care about the immunology principles of how Stelara worked. They just wanted, what are my key selling messages? How can I understand all of this complicated science? And that was just fantastic. And many of those I'm still in touch with today. So overall, I was at Janssen for 11 years. 5 of those on that medical affairs side of the business, very much on the commercial side. So I moved very quickly from a UK to what we call a regional role.
Right,
that was Europe, Middle East and Africa. So that was even more travel than I'd been doing before. And then about 2012, 2013, Johnson & Johnson announced the opening of their innovation centres globally. So there were 4 at the time across the globe to really engage with the external scientific community. So the biotech companies, the universities, the investors in the EMEA region, for example, and the office is based in London. And I felt that was going to take me much more back onto the sort of R&D side of things, the earlier drug discovery through to development. And in essence, I shoehorned my way in there. There wasn't a job created. I had to find creative ways to de-risk it for the business because this was a whole new concept, these innovation centres. They'd got individuals for each of the therapy areas. Immunology was the therapy area I worked in and wanted to stay in. And they'd appointed somebody to lead that. I just thought, what about if I do a secondment for a year? And if we can create the business case for a second headcount role, then great. If not, I'll find something else. And within 9 months, we'd created the headcount role.
Yeah.
And built a portfolio that was from really early exploratory blue sky science through to clinical proof of concept molecules that ran external to what we were doing internally, because that was the whole point. You didn't want it to compete with internal resources. But so that was a real buzz. And I did that for 6 years. And then at that time, I was headhunted for a role at an organisation that's now called Health Innovation East to be their commercial director. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really know what Health Innovation East did, but in essence, they're funded partly by the NHS and the Office for Life Sciences to bring health technologies at pace to their local NHS. And Health Innovation East, the east part, refers to the east of England. So that's a population of about 5.5 to 6 million people. I happen to live in the east of England, so too do my family. So anything that could expedite their diagnosis, their treatment journeys, whatever that was, that felt really compelling. So my team, I had to set up a team from scratch. And when I left after 6 years, so that was in October 2024, the team were about 14 people, a mixture of industry secondments as well as headcount employees of all sorts of experiences. And we really were the engine room working with the companies, from the small medtech companies to the very large corporates, the Johnson & Johnson's, the AstraZeneca's and everybody else, and really helping them develop their value propositions so that then when we brokered that conversation with stakeholders within the NHS, it was a much more fulfilling conversation for everybody's time, rather than, we've been trying to get into that particular hospital or speak to GPs.
Yeah.
And some of that was small companies helping them with their product design and getting it in the hands of who would be eventual users. And one company, through a very early, what we called a public patient involvement session, they claim that they got to product design freeze 12 months earlier than if they hadn't have done that at that moment in time. So I think as founders or as scientists or maybe clinicians as well, we focus on what we're trying, what the tech, all the fancy stuff is that we're trying to do. And we don't always think to, let's just sanity check this with, even if it's just 2 or 3 end users. That's not quite working, or I can't see the result there. Okay, now we need to work on that.
Yeah. As somebody who's a huge advocate for patient and public involvement, it's great to hear the difference that it makes, because sometimes when you tell people and they're a bit like, oh yeah, whatever, but to actually have a tangible difference is amazing. And so it makes sense hearing all about your history there, why you are such a good candidate for this entrepreneur in residence role, having this experience across lots of different organizations. But I can tell from just the way you're speaking that it's that making a difference in the real world that seems to be the thing that really motivates you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's going to sound a bit trite whenever I say it, but as I said, in my previous role at Health Innovation East, it was very much the local news happens to be called Look East. And there was an occasion where this particular device I referenced about the user insights, and that was on the tea time news. And I was able to put on my family WhatsApp chat, oh, look, check the news out. Yeah. And just to feel you were a little crumb in the whole journey, and that now coming to patients or being much more widely known about. That's just, I don't need to be the spokesperson or the front person for it, but just And also for those founders, it's such a hard and lonely journey for the founders and for those small companies to really, I'm just blown away by their resilience constantly. And if I can just help them overcome whatever that barrier is, and sometimes it is just having an objective shoulder to cry on or ear to that listens to and can play stuff back, perhaps with other perspectives. But what's lovely is those founders never forget, and they're so thankful. And you just think, to me, that now feels a tiny little thing, given where you've got to now, how much money you've raised, how many patients you're supporting. But yeah, it's quite humbling in that kind of way. So yeah, that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
It's really coming across. And so I do like to ask all of my guests this question, but if you had a magic wand, what would you change about the world that you work in?
Oh, equitable access for every patient or person that needed a particular health technology, let's call it, not necessarily a drug, but health technology. Equitable access. We don't have equitable access in the UK or in England, let alone globally. So that's what it would be.
Yeah, so is this meaning what they talk about at the postcode lottery side of things? Yeah,
definitely.
No, that does sound, and when you hear about all these new technologies and treatments and things that are coming out, I guess I'm probably not the only person who goes through your mind. You're like, oh yeah, that's well and good, but will anybody actually get to use it? Yeah. Yes, that would indeed be a fantastic thing. And keeping an eye on the time, we should probably think about wrapping up our conversation. So if anybody wants to find out more about you or the work that you do, whereabouts would be the best place to find out?
So I've got a LinkedIn profile, so anybody can message me on that, and then we can connect through emails and things thereafter. Finding out about what the Babraham Research Campus does, we've got a website, and on that we've got our impact report, which is a nice distilled summary of basically the economic impacts, job creation and investment raised by the companies that we support. But it's got everything else that we do on the campus as well.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. We'll get links for both of those and put them in the show notes. It just remains to say thank you so much for taking the time to come along and share what you do and your journey to get there. It's been really interesting.
Oh, thank you very much, Sarah. Likewise.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links in the episode description to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and the theme music is by Lemon Music Studios on Pixabay. And you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.